What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, we are going over the must-start or avoid wide receivers for Week 1. We finally made it, guys, the start of the NFL season. Keep in mind, though, the information we have available to us when it comes to how these defenses are going to perform against the pass, it's pretty limited. We have the information that we gathered from last season, but the defensive rosters look vastly different than what they did a season ago. Understandably, you should be focusing on starting the players you drafted with the highest draft capital, but those players that are on the cusp, those flex players, there are going to be certain situations in which we may want to pivot. We are going to go through each and every matchup, so we'll be able to let you know how we have these players ranked for this upcoming week. So by the end of it, you should have a good understanding of which players you want to start. If you want full access to our weekly rankings, consider signing up for our in-season package available at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Link for that, as always, in the description box below. Before we do get into the video, though, stat of the day. Yesterday's stat of the day was among tight ends with at least 40 targets who had the highest touchdown rate. The correct answer was Darren Fells. Congratulations to Big Boy 301. You got this one right. As for today's stat of the day, which wide receiver led the league in fantasy points from the slot position? Leave your answer in the comment section down below. We'll be happy to let you know who wins in tomorrow's video. We have a ton of matchups to go over, so let's hop right into it. The first matchup, we have the Thursday night matchup, the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Houston Texans. This week's matchup has the highest over-under of the entire week, coming in at 54.5 points. Usually that's an indicator that we can start some of the other pieces around this offense that may not be the usual playmakers. In week 1, that does bring in a bit more risk than usual. The players that would be on the cusp of starter level production would be Brandon Cooks or Mecole Hardman. I believe out of the two, Brandon Cooks, you can make an easier case for starting him. We have him ranked just outside the top 36 wide receivers, and that is in part because he is dealing with a quad injury. We're not sure how that will overall impact his snaps or if he will have success, especially in week 1 while he's developing that chemistry with Deshaun Watson. You are going to be inflating the risk overall for your team for the week, but when it comes to players I'm putting into my flex position, I do want to put in players that do have plenty of upside. Brandon Cooks undeniably has that, especially in this matchup. As for Will Fuller, he to me is virtually an auto start. You're not sure how many games you're going to get out of Will Fuller completely, so putting him in at the start of the season when he's presumably his healthiest is going to be your best bet. If you drafted him, this is the time of year to start playing him. The chemistry he's developing with the other weapons, that being Deshaun Watson, it can't be as great as what it will be in the coming week, so Will Fuller will have his greatest advantage in week 1, so you want to take advantage of that by starting him as early as you can. We have Will Fuller ranked as the wide receiver 30, so definitely in that starter territory, and then as for Brandon Cooks, he's just outside the top 36, so definitely an upside play in contention to take up your flex spot. As for the Kansas City Chiefs, we're starting Tyreek Hill, and we really can't trust the other options, at least not for week 1. The next matchup we have is the Seattle Seahawks versus the Atlanta Falcons. This has a 48.5 point over-under. The Seattle Seahawks are favorite by just a mere 1.5 points. This indicates that a passing game script should be available on both sides of the ball throughout the entire game. Seattle, I believe, should be a bit heavier favorited in this matchup, which would mean a better performance overall for Chris Carson, but I think both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, they're definitely viable starters in your wide receiver 2 slot. We do have Tyler Lockett ranked a bit ahead of DK Metcalf, him being a mid to back end wide receiver 2, DK Metcalf being a back end wide receiver 2 to high end wide receiver 3. A player you potentially would feel more comfortable putting in your flex position, but both starters nonetheless. As for the Atlanta side of the ball, you really don't need me to tell you we're starting Julio Jones, we're starting Calvin Ridley. Expect good things from Calvin Ridley in this matchup. A 48.5 point over under. If Calvin Ridley were to have a good game, it would surprise nobody. Julio Jones, a top 5 wide receiver. Calvin Ridley inside the top 20 as well. The next matchup we have is the New York Jets versus the Buffalo Bills, a divisional matchup with a 39 point over under. The Buffalo Bills 6.5 point favorites. Now we know with Buffalo, the only starter in contention is going to be Stephon Diggs. We think he can perform easily as a back-end wide receiver 2 and exploit this defense. The only problem is the overall upside for him is going to be capped unless he pops off on a couple of big plays, because again, the projected point total, it's not going to be all that high, and if the Buffalo Bills have a lead going into the end of the third, early fourth quarter, the passing and run splits may not look exactly like they did in the first half of the game. Regardless though, back end wide receiver 2 is a good spot for Stephon Diggs. On the other side of the ball, you really shouldn't feel forced to start anybody, but I will mention that Jamison Crowder, although we do have him ranked outside of flex territory, you could consider him if you're very thin at the wide receiver position. 2 of his top games in 2019 did come against Buffalo, and while the defense does seem very scary to play your receivers against, it mostly counts for the outside wide receivers as opposed to the receivers playing primarily from the slot. Tre'Davious White, he's going to be covering those outside presences. Jamison Crowder, that's just not where they line him up on the field. Regardless though, try to avoid starting anyone on this team because the projected point total for this overall offense is very low. If you're expecting a touchdown from any player, you're gonna have to get a bit lucky. But let's move into the next matchup. Detroit Lions versus the Chicago Bears with a 44.5 point over under. Detroit Lions favorite by 3. I'm really loving getting any receivers that are in this game into my lineup. Reason being is because the backfields within these offenses, they have a lot of question marks, a lot of injuries. David Montgomery, we're not sure if he's going to play, or if he does, it will be in a limited capacity. That may force Cordero Patterson or Tariq Cohen to play more snaps, which would indicate a more pass-heavy game script. As for the Detroit Lions, they did bring in Adrian Peterson to potentially take snaps away from an injured DeAndre Swift, but it's going to be a carousel of running backs, so they should focus more on the wide receiver position. Both Allen Robinson and Kenny Golladay are ranked inside of our top 8 at the receiver position. Anthony Miller, he could be a desperation flex, and Marvin Jones as well does have upside in this matchup to pop off. We have him actually ranked inside of our top 36, so putting an upside player like him in your flex position could definitely pay off. We can breeze through this next matchup. It's the Green Bay Packers versus the Minnesota Vikings, a divisional matchup in which we're starting both Davante Adams and Adam Thielen. Davante Adams is ranked as the 2nd overall wide receiver for the entire week, and Adam Thielen also is inside the top 12. We're not starting any other wide receivers on either team, so we'll just breeze into the next one. The New England Patriots versus the Miami Dolphins. It has a 42.5 point over under. A lot of question marks that are going on in this game. We have Ryan Fitzpatrick listed as the starter for Miami, which is positive news for Devontae Parker, but unfortunately he is going to get the Stephon Gilmore treatment. That is going to overall limit the floor and ceiling of Devontae Parker, which would knock him out as a safe wide receiver too, putting him into a situation where he's more of a risky flex play. And Julian Edelman as well, he's risky to start in week 1. You may have invested decent draft capital into getting him on your team, which may force you to start him, but if you do start him as nothing more than a flex player, but one that's more of a safe floor play as opposed to a high upside play. Both wide receivers we do have just barely ranked inside the top 30, which makes them starters, but neither one we're really thrilled to get in our lineup. Up next, we have the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Washington Football Team. Easily enough, on the Washington side of the ball, we're starting Terry McLaurin and nobody else. The Philadelphia Eagles defense from a passing perspective has been exploited in many matchups, making Terry McLaurin a great start this upcoming week. Now we do have him ranked inside the top 20 wide receivers. That's likely around where you drafted him, so get him into your lineup. As for the Philadelphia side of the ball, we don't have Jalen Reagor. He's listed as doubtful, at least at this point of recording. Alshon Jeffrey, we're unsure if he's playing as well. This makes Deshaun Jackson a much more viable option. However, you know the risk that you're going to have to take on in order to start him. You likely drafted him in the later rounds, so you probably have better options as well. While he is going to have immense upside in this matchup, and he popped off in this same matchup week 1 of the 2019 season, just know it's still going to be a risk, so don't start him as anything more than a flex and try not to get too cute with it. Moving on, we have the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Carolina Panthers. This is a great matchup for DJ Moore. We have him ranked inside the top 10. We'll really get a good understanding of how high his ceiling really is for this upcoming year. While it's not going to show everything, and chemistry between him and the quarterback should develop as the year goes on, it is a great matchup. We would be disappointed if he didn't provide wide receiver 1 type production, or at least not get the volume we're expecting him to get. So he is a safe player that we would comfortably put in as our wide receiver 1. On the other side of the ball though, there are no wide receivers we should even consider. Moving on, we have the Indianapolis Colts versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. In this matchup, the Indianapolis Colts are pretty heavy favorites, coming in at 8 points, which could ultimately result in the fourth quarter for the Indianapolis Colts being a more run-heavy approach, which could limit the overall volume for T.Y. Hilton. T.Y. Hilton would be the only receiver on the Indianapolis side we would consider starting, so this could put a dent in his overall floor. We do think he is still a good option to start at the wide receiver 2 slot. Definitely an amazing player to start in your flex because he still does have upside. He's not required to have a ton of volume in order to produce. He's just not that type of player. And let's face it, the Jacksonville Jaguars defense, even from a passing defense perspective, they're not all that strong. So it's definitely a defense that T.Y. Hilton can exploit even in reduced volume. So start T.Y. Hilton, start him and feel fairly confident about it. Just know he may not have the most volume he'll have all season. As for DJ Chark, we're starting him as a back-end wide receiver 2 as well. While this isn't the best defense to go against when it comes to a matchup perspective, it's still going to be a positive game script for him because they're 8-point dogs. There's likely going to be a heavy passing volume given to him in the fourth quarter, which could ultimately lead to garbage time points in a very high ceiling. His floor is going to be pretty low, but he'll make up for that in upside. So start DJ Chark, start him with confidence as your wide receiver 2. The next matchup we have is the Cleveland Browns versus the Baltimore Ravens. We'll start with the Baltimore side of the ball since it's a bit more simple. The only player we're in contention of starting is Marquise Brown. I think he makes a solid flex play this week. Nothing to truly be all that scared about on the Cleveland side of the ball. Something that could potentially stop Marquise Brown. The only thing holding him back will be the volume, of course. But he should come into this season healthier than he was at any point last season. So the upside for him is definitely going to be there. Upside is something we can't truly expect. On the other side of the ball coming from Cleveland, Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, they're going to be faced with a tough matchup against Baltimore, one of the better pass defenses in the entire league. So the ceiling for Odell Beckham will be a bit lower. You still have to start him as your wide receiver 2 because of the draft capital you invested in him. It's unlikely you'll have a player that you would want to start over him that you drafted after him unless you're in a smaller league. Jarvis Landry, however, he can also be played in the flex. Just know we're not 100% sure of how healthy he is heading into this game, so that does provide a certain level of risk as well. However, he has had good performances against this defense in the past, so it wouldn't surprise anybody if he does pop off or play well. So to summarize, we have Jarvis Landry, a back-end wide receiver 3/flex play for this upcoming week, Marquise Brown, a mid-grade wide receiver 3, and Odell Beckham, a mid-grade wide receiver 2. Up next, we have the Cincinnati Bengals versus the Los Angeles Chargers. Let's start with Cincinnati. There is a ton of risk with every player in this offense. For starters, we don't know exactly how well Joe Burrow is going to perform. There is no preseason to really gauge how comfortable he feels in this offense. The draft capital invested in both AJ Green and Tyler Boyd doesn't really warrant a start. You could have other players or better options out there, so putting either one of these into your flex spot, it could be risky. The LA Chargers defense is a very strong, one of the best secondaries in the entire league, so that's not helping either player's floor. There's also a report that AJ Green could see as little as 35 total snaps. If AJ Green were to see that small of a snap percentage, Tyler Boyd, he would be a much better start, and AJ Green would be extremely risky, but we cannot confirm nor deny if that report is going to be true or hold true for this week's matchup. For that unknown though, we do have Tyler Boyd ranked ahead of AJ Green this week. Both players are going to be mid-grade wide receiver 3s to flex plays for this upcoming week, but just know that each one of them does have their level of risk attached. On the other side of the ball for the LA Chargers, this is a good and positive situation for the potential volume for Keenan Allen. Mike Williams, he may not play, and while Mike Williams has never really commanded a high target market share, him not being on the field does increase the ceiling in the potential volume for him. Due to matchup, we do have Keenan Allen ranked as a back-end wide receiver 2, but one with a pretty solid floor as well as a potential to pop off. Up next, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the New Orleans Saints. It's pretty simple. The draft capital invested in all these players warrants a start. These players are going to be auto starts every week. We're talking Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Michael Thomas. Both of these defenses are solid, but their offenses are their strong suits for each team, which means there is a potential for a shootout in this matchup. We're not exactly sure how Tom Brady will play in his first year in this offense, but regardless, all three of these players are ranked very highly for this upcoming week. We have Michael Thomas as the number 1 wide receiver, Chris Godwin in the top 5 as well, and Mike Evans still inside the top 10. So we're expecting big things from these players. They all have immense upside, very safe floors, and with a 49-point over-under, each one of these players has the potential to be a week winner. Moving on, we have the Arizona Cardinals versus the San Francisco 49ers. Not the ideal matchup you'd be looking for as a DeAndre Hopkins owner, but due to talent, we still have him ranked just inside the top 12. We do have to understand that his overall ceiling and floor could be a bit limited, especially with this being his first game and first year in this offense, but that's not to say he has absolutely no upside. His floor may be a bit more limited than we've seen in most parts of his entire career, but that's absolutely no reason to leave your second round pick on the bench. No other receiver on either side of the ball we're considering starting outside of him. The final matchup we have for Sunday and the night game is the Dallas Cowboys versus the LA Rams. This has a 51.5 point over under, so we could expect a potential shootout, which means even though Amari Cooper is injured, you have to make sure to get him in the lineup. We think Michael Gallup is also a very solid start. Amari Cooper just outside the top 12 receivers. Michael Gallup more of a flex play, but one that could have even more upside if Amari Cooper were to be on a limitation of snaps. CeeDee Lamb you should probably leave on the bench, but if you did want to start him in the flex in a 14-team league or a deeper league, we could understand it. On the other side of the ball though, for the LA Rams, we're starting Cooper Kupp, we're starting Robert Woods. Cooper Kupp we do have ranked higher than Robert Woods. Both players are wide receiver 2s. Robert Woods being the safe floor play, Cooper Kupp being the upside play, Cooper Kupp a high-end wide receiver 2, and Robert Woods being that there in the middle. We have 2 games on Monday, and the lines for these games have not been finalized, but what I do expect for this first matchup, Pittsburgh Steelers versus the New York Giants, is a moderate to low projected point total, with the Pittsburgh Steelers being a significant favorite. With Pittsburgh projected to be the favorite, this would indicate a positive passing game script for the New York Giants. However, this defense is very tough. I would not trust any receiver against this defense. If we did have to pick one receiver out of the 3, that being Golden Tate, Darius Slayton, or Shepard, it would definitely be Shepard, but we would try to even avoid putting him into the flex spot. We're not sure of exactly how the target splits are going to be going out through this offense. Daniel Jones is still a bit unproven, and with this being a very difficult matchup, it's going to be nearly impossible to predict how the points are going to be distributed. This is an ideal matchup for Juju Smith-Schuster on the Pittsburgh side of the ball. We're not starting Deontay Johnson yet. If you're in a deeper league, maybe you can fit him into the flex, but don't expect anything, at least not in week 1. Deontay Johnson should have been drafted to take a wait and see approach as opposed to putting him in the lineup week 1. So putting him in the flex spot does come with a lot of risk, so stick to the safety in Juju Smith-Schuster. Juju Smith-Schuster we do have ranked just inside the top 10, so we're expecting pretty good things from him in week 1. The final matchup we have is the Denver Broncos versus the Tennessee Titans. Once again, we don't have a finalized line for this game, but I would expect it to be relatively low scoring. Both offenses, they do have a better run game than a passing game. That's not to say that they don't have weapons that are startable in the receiver position. AJ Brown and Courtland Sutton should both be started in this matchup. AJ Brown to be started as a mid to high end wide receiver 2, and Courtland Sutton maybe not that safe of a floor or with that amount of upside, but still a pretty solid wide receiver 2, and an even better start if you could get him into your flex. The floor for each player should be relatively low, and I don't think the overall upside for Courtland Sutton would be there, but we know AJ Brown always has the potential to pop off, so there should be absolutely no circumstances in which you leave Brown on the bench. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hope you enjoyed. We went through every matchup. If you want access to our full rankings to know which player we would exactly start over the other, go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Links in the description. If you did enjoy this video though, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.